Welcome back to the Simple Sports Podcast. Week 2 of the NFL 2019 season, 100th season of the NFL is in the books. It is still far too early to make some sweeping judgments, of course, but we do know a few things. I want to talk about those things today. A couple of things that we want to talk about. First of all, the teams that stink. That would be the Dolphins and the Giants, the Jaguars, the Steelers, especially now that Big Ben is gone, although we'll see about Mason Rudolph. The Jets, I think with or without Sam Darnold, but hey, what do I know, right? The Jets stink. I don't know if all you guys holding out hope for the Jets this year, next year, 3 years from now. The Jets stink. Okay. And then we know about a few teams that are obviously really good. The Patriots, the Rams, the Chiefs. A few teams that I still have some questions about. The Packers, the Seahawks. But by and large, those things we know. Everyone else I have tons and tons of questions about, whether the schedule has been soft thus far and we just don't really know, or injuries have taken its tolls, like the Saints. I'm not necessarily out on the Saints yet. It's really going to depend how they fare in their schedule without Drew Brees. But the bulk of teams are still searching for their identity, of course. That's just the way the NFL works. We're still in week 2 or heading into week 3 now. And some of these teams need to come to terms with their personnel. We'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. But by and large, the first 2 weeks of this season have just been like all the other first couple of weeks in every season, especially in recent years. And that is just a jumbled mess. We don't really truly know who's good outside of a handful of teams. We don't really truly know who's bad outside of a handful of teams. So today, let's talk about the things that we do know, and we will start with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So for myself, I've thought for a few years now that the Steelers are just overrated. That is with air quotes, of course, considering that the Steelers supposedly represent this great historic franchise. And if you compare that to the product they've put on the field the last few years and the results that they've yielded, it just doesn't line up. They've made the playoffs a few times, but they fizzled out usually fairly early, usually against the Patriots. But let's start with the fact that you don't get better by losing arguably two guys who are the best at their position, two guys in the middle of their prime who are also the best or arguably the best at their position. You just don't get better from that. And no, the Steelers weren't winning Super Bowls with Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. Of course they weren't. They still had to contend with the Patriots. But the fact remains, and I think I can say with confidence, that if they had them both last year, I think they would have at least made it into the playoffs. And if they had them both this year, they at least wouldn't be staring 4-12 or 3-13 right in the face, because that's where they currently sit. And as of right now, well, I guess it's not as of right now, but right now, Big Ben is done for the year due to injury. I personally believe he may be done for good. I've been out on Big Ben for a few years now. He's never been one to take care of his body, and while this isn't necessarily a result of him not taking care of his body, I think people would be more apt to believe he'd be coming back if he were to take better care of his body. And if he had been producing, if the last season didn't go the way it did and this year didn't start off the way it did, I think people would be a little bit more confident in him coming back. But I, for one, don't think that is the case. Certainly not in Pittsburgh. I think he's thrown his last pass in Pittsburgh. And maybe that's a bit overreactionary considering it just happened this Sunday. And, you know, obviously he's a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's a Hall of Fame talent. He's a great, all-time great quarterback. And he played for one of the storied franchises in the NFL. But I just think, I think he's done. And to me, there's one big difference between a guy like Big Ben and a guy like Eli Manning. And that is the fact that Big Ben's base level, his base level of talent is higher than Eli Manning's. But both of them are living off of their name and their past accomplishments. Obviously, Big Ben and the Steelers have far more recent success than the Giants have had in the last, say, 5 years. But if you look at the big picture, neither one has had any real true success in terms of winning Super Bowls or getting to the Super Bowl since their last appearance. And I don't care that he led the league in passing last year as far as yardage is concerned. I don't care that he went for 5,000 yards. With no L. Bell last year, they didn't make the playoffs. And with no AB and L. Bell this year, they lost by 30 in primetime on opening night to a rival in the New England Patriots, in which the game wasn't even close to competitive. It's not even close. They couldn't move the ball. I don't know if Big Ben wasn't throwing the ball down the field due to the elbow injury. If that was a factor at that time, I'm not 100% sure. But the fact remains that they didn't. And then they followed that up with a loss to the Seahawks, albeit at the hands of Big Ben's injury. I'm sure that played a factor in it. They were obviously in the game before that. But as of right now, there's a legitimate argument to be made that the Steelers are the worst team in the AFC North. And that's with the Bengals included. And that was with Big Ben on the field. To come out and get smacked by 30, albeit by the Patriots, I get it. But that's your bugaboo. That's your team. That's the one you can't beat. Now, we can speculate all day about what may have happened on Sunday and going forward for the rest of the season had Big Ben not gotten hurt. But the fact remains he's gone, and they lost again. They're 0-2, and I don't think they're going to win many games as a result. I think Mason Rudolph will do well enough that the Steelers will elect to move on from Ben if he doesn't retire first. He spoke about retirement in the past, and once you start doing that, it's pretty much a done deal. So I think Mason Rudolph will do well enough that the Steelers would like to move on. I don't think he's going to lead them to 8-10 wins, anything like that. Maybe 4 to 6, somewhere in that neighborhood. They're still a good organization. They still have a lot of talent on the roster on both sides of the ball, albeit the defense has been struggling. But hey, they're the Steelers. I don't see them being a complete disaster for that fact. They are a well-run organization. So, but that does lead me to Mike Tomlin. He has a resume that most couldn't even sniff, couldn't even come close to, would die to have the same resume or close to what he has, and not a single losing record since he's been there, if I'm not mistaken. Typically, you can expect the Steelers to be in the playoffs, and on occasion, a high seed, 1 or 2 seed with the bye, home field throughout. But again, the bugaboo has been the Patriots, and they typically get embarrassed by the Patriots. On the road, at home, doesn't really matter. They get diced and sliced every single time Tom Brady steps on the field, and I can't really hold anyone responsible for that but the coach. It's one thing if it happens once or twice. You can sort of lay blame at the players. But eventually, as a coach, you've got to come up with a better game plan. I see them fall for the flea flicker almost every single time that they play. That's just an issue, something to me that speaks to coaching. There's a lot of schematics. They play a lot of man-to-man defense against the Patriots, which clearly has never worked. So I put that at the feet of the coach. The question is, should he face some heat for it? And again, if you look at his resume, no, he probably shouldn't. But he will. That's the way Steelers Nation works. That's the way the nation works as a whole in terms of sports. Like, once you start losing, it doesn't matter what your past is. Jeff Fisher was a solid coach, and then he started losing, and all of a sudden he couldn't coach. And so, the same thing could happen to Mike Tomlin. Now, depending on who you ask, he either allowed the AB and Bell drama to fester and grow into what it was, or it's a miracle that he was able to keep them on track as long as he did amidst all that chaos. But regardless of which way you may look at it, the fact remains that it all occurred, and it all occurred under his watch. And as the general and as the leader, along with Big Ben, who's certainly not without blame in that regard. In fact, I think he holds a lot of that blame. But they will ultimately be held responsible, the two of them. Bell and AB are gone. So regardless of how you feel about them, the Steelers' demise this year has nothing to do with them. They're not there anymore. And Steeler Nation, a lot of people out in the media and so forth and so on, for whatever reason, thought, regardless of how you feel about L. Bell and AB, losing them doesn't make you a better team. Like, I don't care what you say. That's talent and production that you have not replaced. So, maybe it would be best for Mike Tomlin to move on. You never know. Starting anew with a new organization. Bill Belichick did it. You see how that turned out for him, albeit not the same situation. But the point being, sometimes where you are isn't the best place for you. And maybe it was at one point for Mike Tomlin, but as of right now, it doesn't look good for either one, Big Ben or Mike Tomlin. But again, sometimes the best thing you can do is start anew. Only a handful of teams can claim anything close to the level of stability and success that the Steelers have had. And as far as I can tell, none of those positions will be open. So we'll see how it shakes out. But for now, I am moving on. Now, the last thing I need in my life is for the Dallas Cowboys to end up in the Super Bowl. Aside from, a team in the Tennessee Titans division, there's only a handful of teams that I would pay money to not have win the Super Bowl. That'd be the Cowboys and the Packers and probably the Steelers, actually. But as much as I hate on the Dallas Cowboys, you can't help but be impressed so far. Their schedule has been soft, no doubt, but you can only beat who's in front of you. And as long as you don't play down to the competition, if they had made it a close game with the Redskins or a close game in week 1, then I'd be a little bit more concerned. But they didn't. They did exactly what they need to do, and so you have to give them credit. And I'm going to give them credit for that. Again, I'm not as sold on the Dallas Cowboys as others are, but to this point, they've beat who was in front of them, and so you have to tip your hat to them. Zeke's been getting his work and getting back into football shape, so that's nothing but good, especially considering they've won both games. And Dak Prescott has been exceptional through 2 games, so you can't argue with that, albeit against lesser competition. Again, you got to beat who's in front of you. They get Miami at home next week, so I do expect them to get to 3-0 with another impressive win. Certainly can't let that be a close game, where I'm really going to start asking some questions because the Dolphins have been nothing but piss poor so far. But then we'll start to see them get challenged a little bit with the Packers and the Eagles. The Saints would have been on that list if not for the injury to Drew Brees. That game will probably be a little bit closer than most people will expect because Sean Payton's a good coach. Teddy Bridgewater is a solid quarterback. He's not Drew Brees, but Sean Payton will find a way to get that in order by then. Bridgewater was kind of thrown into the wolves, obviously with Brees going down in the game. So them not doing so well against the Rams, I didn't think was too crazy. Some people have completely written them off, which I understand. Drew Brees is going to miss about 6 weeks, so I think it's really going to depend how that schedule plays out. But back to the Cowboys. They also get to play the Jets, which they stink, and they don't have Sam Darnold, so they stink even more. They get to play the Lions and the Giants, so those should all be wins. The rest of their schedule includes teams like the Vikings and the Bears, both of which are better teams compared to last year, especially on defense. So they should represent a challenge, but I still expect the Cowboys to come out on top in those games as well. They are the clear front runner in NFC East and one of the better teams in NFC. I find it hard to see a world in which the Cowboys don't make the playoffs this year. The Eagles are really their only competition in their division, and they're off to a slow start. They lost they lost last week against the Falcons. Week 1, they started off slow. They got decimated by injuries against the Falcons, and so you kind of expected that to go the way it did. And even if they manage to blow the division lead and lose it, there aren't a ton of teams in the NFC that are really on their level as far as wild card competition goes. I think they're better than the 49ers. I'm not 100% sure about the Seahawks. I think the Cowboys are better, though I think the Seahawks are a better team than last year, certainly. And again, most of that hesitation has to do with the schedule and who they played. The Seahawks played the Bengals and the Steelers, so it's hard to really place these teams as of right now. And I said that in my last podcast, so I'll shake up the power rankings after week 4. I still think the Cowboys are better than the Seahawks, but again, they're all in that same sort of class. Atlanta's in that class right now. We'll see depending on which defense shows up, but they could be right there as well. Right now I have the Cowboys and the Bears, the Vikings, the Packers kind of all bundled up together, and they'll start to separate as time goes on throughout the year. But as I said, I can't hate. I need some more time with the Cowboys to see what happens in the next couple of weeks. But as I said, I can't hate. They've done what they needed to do, which is beat the teams they were supposed to beat and beat them soundly. And so hats off for now, but I am moving on. as a Tennessee Titans fan, I have puked so much watching them over the last 10 years, even longer, that I've come close to literally puking my guts out. And just when they come out and obliterate the Cleveland Browns, albeit most of their action coming late after a few turnovers, short field, etc., still, you have to go and convert. And I thought maybe they had turned the corner offensively finally. Guys were running open, making plays. Mariota took some shots down the field. The rookie wide receiver they drafted, A.J. Brown, was more than impressive. Finally, we got someone in the first round at the skill position that was exceptional. Delaney Walker was back making plays like business as usual. And then they come out and they lost the divisional home game to the Colts without Andrew Luck. It's incredible. It's really incredible. I remember the year they made the playoffs a few years ago, 2 years ago, and they beat the Chiefs. They were 6-3 heading into Pittsburgh in Week 9. Thursday night football with a chance to take, I think it was the 2 seed. It might have even been the 1 seed, or at least tied for the 1 seed. I don't remember exactly. But I know it was a chance to be in the top 2. They had a chance to take command of the AFC South and a chance to close out the season with the bye week for the playoffs. It was the first time really in a long time that they had a true, show us who you are type of game in quite a while. And going into halftime, it was a close game. I don't recall exactly if they were leading or not. I think they were down a score, 6 points. But I do remember it being a one-score game. And then the game finished 40-17. And the Titans finished the season 9-7 and had to go on the road as a wild card. First to Kansas City, which they ended up winning the comeback 22-21. They were down 18 points on the road in a hostile environment. Hats off to them. That was an impressive win, one of the best wins I've seen them have in a while. And then they had to go to Foxborough where they got bludgeoned by the Patriots. So it ended in failure. But I guess you can't necessarily call it a failure considering where they come from. But this year, to start the season, they go on the road in the AFC. Not a divisional team, obviously, but still the team in the AFC. A team that they could potentially be fighting for a wild card spot if they don't win the division. In the Cleveland Browns, they absolutely smoked them. And sure, it's only week 2. I get it. I'm not overly panicking. It's just more of the same. It's a home divisional game against a team whose starting quarterback retired unexpectedly 2 or 3 weeks prior to the season, and they're now relying on a backup in Jacoby Brissett. He's a reliable backup, obviously, and he's certainly a capable starter. I'm not 100% sure he's this great talent that some people seem to want to portray him as. He's really good. Average quarterback, I think somewhere in the middle pack. But he was a backup nonetheless. Backup to Andrew Luck. And they were absolutely wet the bed yet again. Mariota wet the bed. Their offensive weapons wet the bed. The defense played well, mostly. But in critical spots, made critical errors, missing drive-ending sacks on Jacoby Brissett, allowing him to scramble on third down and get a first or make a throw down the field for a first down. Ultimately, drives that led to points because of that. The coaches made errors. The kicker missed a field goal that would have given them the lead late. In a week in which you have the opportunity to take early control of the division, stay 2-0 as a record overall, keep pace with teams like the Patriots, teams like the Chiefs. Again, they're not in your division, but you never know what may happen. Maybe the Chiefs lose a couple of games and you're fighting with them for a playoff spot. Maybe the Chargers come on late and you're fighting with them for a playoff spot. You never know. And to let that game, a divisional home game, slip through their fingers like that, it's just the Titans wet the bed yet again. I personally came into the season ready to bail on Mariota with a stretch of bad performances. I really, truly do support him as a quarterback. He's brought nothing but stability to the franchise. But he appears to have hit the ceiling, and the ceiling is just not very good. And, we're not off to a good start as far as his stretch of bad performances go. He was okay in week 1. He wasn't exactly stellar. He came on late. He didn't make any mistakes per se as far as turning the football over, but he wasn't exactly all world either. And for me, I think it's time that Titans fans really come to the realization that, if they haven't already, that Mariota has to be better. The organization has to come to that realization, and fans have to come to that realization. it's year 5 for a number 2 overall pick at quarterback, who has a top 5 defense backing him up. And regardless of what you may feel of their skill players, he has a great tight end. He has 3, count them 3, either first or second round picks at the skill position in Corey Davis, Derrick Henry, and now A.J. Brown. All of which are less than 3 years into the league. Derrick Henry being the oldest, and then they took Henry Davis the next year, and then Brown this year. He's got to get it done, or the Titans will need to move on from Mariota, just like I'm moving on right now. Just like the Dallas Cowboys, you can't help but be impressed with the Baltimore Ravens. In particular, Lamar Jackson, of course. I think we all knew the Ravens' defense would be special. They typically have a really good defense. Never do they have a bad defense. It may not necessarily be top 5 all the time, but they never have a bad defense. And I thought they may take a slight step back this year because they lost C.J. Mosley. Terrell Suggs, although he's older, he's still a really good player, I think, or at least a good enough player to be a starter. But you got to get younger, so I get that. And again, I thought they would take a step back. It's still too early to tell, really, considering who they've played. They played the Dolphins and the Cardinals. But like the Cowboys, you beat who's in front of you. And if they aren't considered as good as you, then you beat them soundly. And that's exactly what the Ravens did to the Dolphins, and that's exactly what they did to the Cardinals. They certainly, the Dolphins may have not even gotten off the bus. The Cardinals put up a better fight, but there's just a clear talent gap there. So, I had my doubts about Lamar, especially after last year's playoff game. I thought he was serviceable in the regular season. The playoff game, he stunk it up, especially in the first half of that game against the Chargers. But he was a rookie. He didn't even have a full season, so you have to excuse some of it. And I still want to see more even now, considering who they played, like I said. But, man, he's been amazing so far. No turnovers. Actually, the whole team doesn't have any turnovers. So that's always excellent. He's a sensational runner of the football, and now he's dropping dimes all over the place. He's layering throws over linebackers and corners, safeties into the hole. So that's always nice to see. And he has his occasional misses, but everyone does. So that's really not a big deal. I think above all, you have to give credit to the Ravens organization as a whole. Top down, left, right, everything in between. They draft well. They develop players well. The players play well most of the time. They always have an excellent defense. Always above average at minimum. They're coached really, really well. They've always have been. Even in the times that they changed coaches, they still have been coached really, really well. And rarely is there any noise from the Baltimore Ravens. In fact, the last thing I can remember is the Ray Rice incident. I don't know if there's been anything, since then. I don't follow them that closely to be keeping up with the off the field stuff. But as far as the stuff that made big news, the last thing I can remember is the Ray Rice incident. And as much of that was on Roger Goodell and the NFL office as it was on the Ravens, as far as how they handled it. So it's one of the most well-run franchises in the NFL in sports, period. And they now have one of the most athletic quarterbacks I certainly have ever seen. If you throw Cam Newton in there as far as his size goes, and sure, he's probably the most athletic we've ever seen. But in terms of sheer, maneuverability, speed, the wiggle, as I call it, the ability to escape the pocket and make people miss once he is out on the run, Cam Newton doesn't really do that. He's more of a bruising type of guy, but still one of the most athletic guys that we've ever seen play the quarterback position. And each week he's progressing more and more and more as a passer. I saw Marcellus. I watch Speak for Yourself every day, and I saw Marcellus Wiley speak of it, and he pointed out the fact that it's not that he couldn't pass, but that he wasn't comfortable yet. And that's a fair point. I didn't think about it like that until he said it, and it makes perfect sense. So I do think he's getting more and more comfortable with the offense, more and more comfortable with the NFL and the speed of the game. And as it slows down, you'll see him start to speed up, so to speak. Comparing his few starts last year to what we've seen so far, it's certainly become evident that he's beginning to get more comfortable. So I'm becoming a fan each day. I can't wait to see more. certainly against some more reliable competition. I'll be following along closely, of course, but until then, I'm moving on. And that's it for today's episode of the Simple Sports Podcast. I'll be back tomorrow to look ahead to Week 3. We're starting to finally see the league and teams sort of take shape into what and who they are. I'm really excited, kind of nervous for Thursday Night Football, Titans and the Jaguars. I'll talk about that in depth more tomorrow. But yeah, it's been a wild ride so far, and that's usually the case. We'll see how everything shakes out. Until the next time, guys, I'll see you. Peace.